This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
Joining me now to talk about the wild pig problem is Aaron Sumrall. He's the Director of Outreach and Education at the Pig Brig, which we're going to find out what the heck that is. Welcome here, Aaron.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm here.
All right. So let's start with, and honestly, if I don't care if you live in Canada or the U.S., if you haven't heard about the wild pig problem, you better, because this is a big one and a growing one. But if you could put it into some perspective, either for your state or your country or frankly North America, what are we tackling here when we talk about the wild pig problem?
Well, one of the things that we're looking at is it's just an exponentially increasing problem. Right now in the states, about 35 states have breeding populations of pigs, and they're moving pretty proficiently across the United States, and really not any place that's limited to where they can go or what they can do just because of the adaptability of the species. Now in Canada, we're seeing that just on the cusp of becoming a major issue there. And the reason for that is that they're a little bit longer in trying to get their foothold in place to be able to establish those breeding populations, where in Canada right now, most of those sounders, and the sounder of pigs is just a family group of pigs, is very transient. So it's somewhat making management a little bit harder, making population estimates in Canada a little bit harder. But the one thing that's definitely in place for what you have up there for your pig populations to grow off of is just unbelievable amounts of agriculture that's available to those pigs, as well as a lot of plants and animals and so forth that they can make a food resource out of as well.
So, and this is one of the things that for anyone who's sort of looked into this issue or has heard about it in their own backyard or own area, there was a time where, you know, the going sort of thought was that a domesticated pig that got out or released into the wild, they simply wouldn't survive. How did we end up in this problem is perhaps one of the questions I have.
Right. Well, and the problem started the same way in the States as it was what we're seeing in Canada. I mean, and whenever pigs were brought over back 500 or so years ago, they were brought in as a livestock species, and they just, as the westward expansion of human population occurred, there were a few pigs that were dribbled across the landscape as people moved from east to west. And those pigs had to adapt, they had to evolve, they had to acclimate to whatever environment they were exposed to. And in Canada is no different. So, I mean, there's a lot of those places that are around the Canadian landscape that have had domestic pigs that for whatever reason, they're no longer in domestic captivity. And the thing that we need to think about with the term feral, whenever we think feral pig, well, we got feral cattle, we've got feral dogs, feral cats. What that just means is that at some point in the lineage of that species, they were once domestic. Well, whenever we think about pigs, after a pig has been forced to live off of the landscape without human intervention or human assistance for about 2 months, they are now considered feral. So they could have very, very well started their life as a domestic species. It could have been a domestic adult that had already went into the breeding cycles that once they were put out on that landscape, then have learned how to adapt and evolve, they're now feral. So what that situation brings to the table in Canada is a little bit different than what we see in the States, is that there's a large influx or a large percentage of the pigs that are on the landscape up there in a feral capacity that are extremely high purity levels as far as direct species or subspecies like a Hampshire or a Landrace or a Yorkshire or something like that, which means that those animals are bred to breed. Mm-hmm. So you can definitely put a lot of pigs on the landscape in a short period of time, but the thought that you had alluded to there about the Canadian environments holding these pig populations in check, we just need to remember, too, about the adaptability of the species. We also need to remember, too, what is one of the best insulators out there on the landscape that's naturally provided? It's snow. Mm-hmm. So in the wintertime, whenever it may be negative 60 above the level of the snow, those pigs just simply burrow under a pretty solid blanket of snow. They combine body masses, body capacity. They share heat. They survive. Given the winter does take quite a few of those younger adult or younger piglets, but if they can live through that first winter, we have an animal that's not likely going to succumb to weather conditions moving forward.
which is terrifying. Anyway, I've worked with pigs. It's a bit scary, I'll be honest. No,
Right.
right? I mean, they have sharp teeth, and they're omnivorous. I mean, they'll eat crops, they'll eat plants, they'll eat truffles, frankly.
It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing for us down here, is that we say that they'll eat everything with a calorie. So
there you go.
Yeah.
So, but that does bring us to the question of course, the environmental impact, the biodiversity impact of having wild pigs on the landscape. I mean, I've certainly heard of the extensive crop damage that they can do. What is the biggest concern, at least from the biodiversity perspective? Because, of course, there would be a biosecurity issue, too. But on the biodiversity side, what are we worried about?
Well, the biodiversity side, too, is also going back to the fact that they're an opportunistic omnivore. About 80 to 90% of the pig's diet is going to be made up of plant matter, with the remaining being animal matter. And with that animal matter, it's going to be anything from grubs to beetles to deer fawns to sheep and goat, lambs and kids, things of that nature. So when we think about the biodiversity impacts, we also need to think about some of the endangered species that depend on microenvironments to sustain their capacities. They may not live in a very broad area, but they're completely dependent on that habitat. Pigs come into those habitats that are extremely sensitive already. They destroy that habitat, then thus goes the species. We're seeing that not just in the United States, we're seeing that all over the planet, where pigs come into those niche environments and they're eliminating species very readily. The other thing that we need to think about with regard to biodiversity is that, you can talk to farmers and ranchers, and you bring up the word coyote to a farmer or rancher, and usually it gets followed by several adjectives to describe that species. But you think about where that's going to, the pig indirectly affecting the farmers and the ranchers, with the coyotes kind of stuck in the middle, is because a lot of Canada is prairie environment type settings, and those have extremely high populations of rodents and mice, rats, voles, whatever the case, that is the staple of food for your coyotes, for your bobcats, your foxes, or wherever wolves are, anything like that. Well, pigs, being an opportunistic omnivore, they find a population that's there, being those types of rodents. They're going to stay on that food source until it's exploited or eliminated. Well, what now do those predators have to do in order to basically make a living? If those natural food sources aren't there anymore, then what are they going to do? Are they going to shift focus to your deer fawns? Are they going to shift focus to hitting your turkey poults a heck of a lot heavier? Mm-hmm. Or are they going to work on your kid goats and lambs, because they have to make a living too? The other thought is, too, for those urban environments, if that food source for some of those predators are eliminated in rural environments, they're going to move closer to town, closer to where people are, because people means there's going to be some type of a food source there, whether it be through trash, pet food, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. So the other thing about it is I live in Texas, so one of the things we definitely enjoy in the fall and the winter time of the year is the waterfowl migrations down to where I live, and the recreational opportunities that come that way. But whenever those birds leave and they go back home, those birds, ducks, geese, whatever else, think about where they nest. They're nesting on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. So whenever we have those birds molt and they start nesting, or they do what they do, they're completely vulnerable to whatever is a ground nesting predator that's on that landscape. So whenever you find a few of those natural predators, again, too, with your coyotes and your foxes and so forth, they take a few. But whenever a pig would get into some of those locations of those ground nesting birds, they just completely decimate it. So it's one of those things that wherever the pig goes, destruction follows. And that's something that has been the mainstay since the first hoof put itself on the ground back in the 1500s. The one thing that we keep thinking about, we keep hearing, is that from the states, is that the pigs are going to populate the northern states from the south, and that's probably not as accurate as what we need to think about. One thing that's different that sets the Canadian pigs apart from the southern, I guess, strain of wild pigs is simply explained in a wildlife rule that's called Bergman's Law, or Bergman's Rule. And the further north a species goes, they kind of change their morphology to the fact that they're having shorter legs, bigger bodies, more robust bodies, smaller ears, so forth and so on, as compared to what we see in the South, where we have animals that are much longer-legged, bigger-eared, because pigs don't sweat, as you're aware of. Yep. And with a longer-legged animal, bigger-eared animal, smaller framed animal. They're built for expelling that excess heat. Where you're at, they have to retain that heat. Where you can take that pig that's in those northern latitudes and much easier move that pig south and be able to easily occupy some of our northern states much easier than what we can take our southern pigs and move them to the north.
Mm-hmm. As someone who is very short and wide, I'm well adapted to northern climates, so I get it.
Right.
It is just like this. It works across species. Okay, so now one of the considerations here as well is, to that point, they are very hardy. They are very resilient. They will wipe out a food source wherever they may go and then move on to the next one. They're also incredibly difficult to get rid of. Why is that?
Right. Well, one of the things is just because pigs are not confined to a range like what you may find in another species. Like if you have a deer population, deer tend to stay within a given range throughout their whole life. And whatever is available within that life, they have to consume, or they don't make it. Pigs are not limited to that capacity. If a pig needs to basically load the wagon and move 50 miles away to find something to eat, they can easily do that. They're going to go wherever their stomachs tell them to go. Okay, so whenever things are not plentiful in the areas where they're at, they'll typically follow a watershed, because water is the mainstay. If there's water there, they can flip over enough rocks. They can dig under a few places there to find enough beetles and grubs to stay alive, as long as there's water. Mm-hmm. So they're going to follow those waterways to wherever they have to go. And we do know that we've got some adult animals that we found that may travel 50, 60 miles for either breeding or nutritional purposes. So we've got to remember that whenever pigs are in a given area on the landscape now, they're not necessarily going to be there next month. And that makes management of that species extremely difficult in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are several initiatives, of course, in Canada as well. This is definitely an issue that in the last few years at least, we've been hearing more about. But we're running out of time, so what is the Pig Brig? I can't go somewhere with it because it's a great name, but I have in my head what I think it is. What is it really?
Right. Well, Pig Brig is the only net patented trap on the planet designed for catching wild pigs. What the Pig Brig is, like I said, it's a net that's fashioned in a form in a way that I guess magnifies the rooting tendencies of feral pigs to push into and under things. And it functions much like a fish trap. So in the set capacity there, the pigs will push under the net, push into the net, and then they just can't come back out, just the way that a fish trap would work. The thing that what we do in management with pigs, implementing the Pig Brig is that the net itself is like 53 pounds. The total trap system is about 85 pounds. So we can move, like we were talking about earlier, the mobility of those species to just cover the landscape. We don't have to worry about loading up a truck or a trailer and being able to and having to follow those pigs into locations that are inaccessible. We can literally put that trap in a backpack and take it wherever we want to go. We can put it on a snow machine. We can put it on an ATV. We can do whatever we need to and go to where the pigs are to manage those animals at the place that they're at and do so quickly. So the way that the Pig Brig is employed is that either you can use the trees that are existing in a landscape, which is in those backcountry situations and harder locations to get to, that is top shelf way to do that. Or if you're more in an area that may be agricultural or something of that nature, it's easier to get to a little bit, is that we use simple T-posts that you use for livestock fencing. And we can move those traps quickly, easily, efficiently, and not have to worry about leaving a big footprint on the land trying to cross it.
Now, for those who are potentially looking for more information on the wild pig problem, on what's happening in their area, or even the Pig Brig, where would you suggest a farmer or a landowner start if trying to find some information on this?
Well, one thing is if you're looking at your Canadian residents up there, the first point of contact that I would become familiar with for the Canadian residents is stay in touch with your Squeal on Pigs effort that's going on across the Canada landscape everywhere. Squeal on Pigs is definitely a sounding board, and they know what's going on in those northern latitudes. As far as everything pigs, that what you may want to explore is our website, and that is pigbrig.com. Whenever you get there, you'll find everything that we have, from education to products to resources, videos, anything that you would think that you would need in a pig management protocol. We've got it right there. But that's pigbrig.com. The other thing that what you can do once you do get to that site, if you have questions there, you can call us directly. We do not farm out anything that we do to somewhere else. You're going to talk to me or someone on our Pig Brig team, and we know specifically what to do to address your particular situation in your region, or we know who you need to contact in that given region. But to contact us via phone, simple phone number, 833-744-2744. So it's 833 Pig Brig. And we'll be glad to visit with you. So, again, too, I'm spending some time in Canada in the past, and I'll be spending time in Canada again moving forward to try to make sure that we get a thumb on the pulse of that pig situation and remove it.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Aaron, and thanks for this and joining me on the show today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.